Welcome to Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. Emotional Algebra is a podcast that helps listeners to understand the subtle calculations people make every day in their relationships with others and explores the known and unknown variables that affect interactions in our everyday lives. It's a podcast to help us all become better people. I'm your co-host, Andrew Tavani.
And I'm Dr. E.
Dr. E, hello, good to see you. Can you believe it? We have done 8 episodes now. This is going to be the 9th episode, and we have covered so much ground.
Hopefully, we haven't really even gotten to the meat of what I'm really looking forward to doing. It's all this just to set up the background knowledge and educational base so that we can build on that and really talking about the issues of current events or life events or bringing in guests and really getting into the meat of what I'm hoping to look into, So that's where this one hopefully will add that much more elucidation to some of the topics that we'll discuss throughout the upcoming episodes.
Absolutely. And you've introduced so many new concepts and hopefully people are finding this useful and helpful and seeing what you're talking about in their everyday lives. I know in this episode, we are going to get deeper into some concepts that you introduced. We're going to talk about love. Ooh, big L word. But let's quickly review what we covered in the last episode, because all of this is, it's like we're building a house and everything builds upon the last thing we did. So why don't you quickly give a review of what we covered?
Well, I think, Andrew, this is almost more of a skyscraper we're building here. So, so many layers on layers and layers. And, so last week we talked about the different models of relationships. And I'll leave one of the end parts of this slide on here just so we can kind of reintroduce the models. The first relationship here on the left side kind of talks about what I call a scarcity model. It's an overlapping energy for the viewers. Or the listeners, it's showing how I had partial circles. So if you remember, we had 2 circles overlapping, and that overlap in the energy, that amount of overlap between those 2 people denoted where the relationship existed. The question I asked is, what happens when that relationship ends? So you're asking which relationship is better. And some people might say, well, the top one was better, but which had less overlap because, there's a moderate overlap there. That's good. And some people say the one underneath that's better because there's more overlap. Therefore there's more interconnectedness. And then we talked about the idea of codependency and what that could look like when people get too overlapped in energy. And then what I said is the question you want to ask is about which relationship is better is not when the relationship is working, it's when the relationship ends. Because in the way we look at power and the way we look at relationships, often we feel like when a relationship ends, I lose what I gave to the relationship. And that's why I call that, more of a scarcity model. So in that, as people have multiple relationships, and that's where, for the listener, the top circle that was there now has little circular, semicircular bites taken out of it, that we often believe the more relationships that we've had come and go, then the less and less of us there is to offer. So we often want to hold on to relationships, or we pull back in our investments in relationships. And then it actually often can lead to the end of relationships because people sense that we're just not that invested. We're not that involved. And then we kind of can have that dance in that situation there.
Okay. Now for the listeners and the viewers, to the right, you have the other model here, and that is a little different. Okay. That's represented. It's like a sort of a purple oval, and let's take a quick look at it again. And it's got 2 circles in there, and it shows more of an exchange of energy. Why don't you explain that, Dr. E?
Right. That's what this is, to me, what we're looking at in terms of the concept of abundance, that we have 2 people who exchange energy, and that exchange of energy creates the third entity called the relationship. We've heard that concept, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This really demonstrates that in the way I look at relationships here. So when the relationship ends, well, people are left with what they came with, as well as what they gained from the relationship. So to me, you can always leave with more. You can always leave with experience and understanding and wisdom gained. Might there still be emotions? Yes, they're going to be emotions. That's just part of life that we want to see. And learning what we do with those emotions and how we manage those emotions is the key part in that. So from here, you see the little circles, and for the listener, there's little circles inside of each person or each in that relationship. Those are the parts and pieces we bring. So remember our self-development episodes we had, the last 2 episodes before this, we talked about self-development and all the parts and pieces that make us who we are. What I talked about is sometimes the very things that bring us together are the same things that pull us apart in the end. So understanding those dynamics is really important in relationships to really see what we can do. Again, so in this, that relationship exists in that exchange of energy. And as we talked about, when this relationship ends, well, both people, like I said, leave with what they came with. And I'm just, for the listener, I'm walking through the slide a little bit to get to the end of it. And this idea of how relationships influence our view of power. Well, as I said, the model on the left, which is that overlapping energy where we feel whittled away, that's a scarcity model that's based in fear. And the model on the right is more of a model of abundance because we can grow through each relationship. So today's concept we're going to talk about is what I call the specificity of love. So, I've talked about in past episodes about the idea of emotional specificity, the idea that each single emotion has a singular purpose, that emotions are there to do things for us, to teach us things, to tell us things, to show us things, and to help us do things for ourselves. So when we start to look at what is that singular purpose for each emotion, whether it's a different note in the keyboard that adds to the songs we can write and the symphonies we can create, or whether it's a different color in the rainbow that helps us to create our masterpiece. The things that we want to start to look at here is really understanding the distinct nature of each emotion. Love is no different. I believe I've talked about the 3 core emotions that I see, that I believe are the 3 core emotions in this universe of emotion, are love, fear, and pain. All emotions are based in that 3. Today, we're just going to focus on the concept of love, not even all the love-based emotions, just the concept of love.
Now, Dr. E, we've been just showing a graphic here showing relationship models and whatnot. So I think at the core of every relationship is love, but I have a feeling that it's not so simple. And
Right.
because I know you, I've gotten to know you while doing this podcast. And so am I right about that?
That's what we want at the core of every relationship. And often what is just right over that can be fear. And what's fear there to do but to protect us from the risk of experiencing pain? So if we see that triad of core emotions and then how all other emotions are off of those, and we start to look at the interchange of those emotions, if we don't understand what love is, how can we truly understand what relationships can be? Not what they are, but what they can be. And it's this concept of love that I look at in the way that we have it in our culture, but also just in our language, that to me creates a lot of disruption, a lot of misunderstandings of it, and a lot of fear and apprehension of really expressing just that singular word love, let alone the other multifaceted concepts and colors of that spectrum.
Yes, I think that's one of the things you've done here throughout this podcast is give people some new terms to apply to things and define emotions, define relationships. So how do we define love?
All right. So here in English, like I said, we use primarily one word to describe the countless types of love. You can love a sunny day. You can love an awesome rainstorm. You can love an ice cream cone, your dogs, your cats, your fish, your sisters, your brothers, your friends, your parents. Your parents can love you. You can love your kids. These are all different types of love. So if you just take love as a diamond and you cut it into all these different facets, the light hits each facet a little differently. But we just pretty much look at that diamond. I think a lot of people who have felt hurt by that and hurt by that concept of love, that's why I said love can be seen as the strongest emotion, which I believe truly it is in this universe, the strongest emotion there is and most powerful. And because of that, conversely, it can be seen as the weakest emotion, when it comes with feeling betrayed, violated, rejected, manipulated, humiliated, used, all these emotions that we would say are really pain-based emotions, that fear is going to protect us from feeling. So this is, again, where we're getting an idea of seeing the relationships between these emotions. And again, as I say fear, remember, fear has its whole spectrum of emotions. Pain has its whole spectrum of emotions. So here's the concept that I'd like viewers to consider and listeners is, could the importance of a concept in a culture be indicative of the number of words used to describe that concept? And I have under there, it says the story of snow. So what is this about snow, and what does snow have to do with love? Well, the idea is that in the Inuit culture and Eskimo cultures, they have 53 different words for different types of snow. Snow is an extremely important concept to understand and to be aware of in that culture, because it can mean literally the difference between life and death. A drifting snow, a light drifting snow, is different than that really heavy snow, is different than that snow that might be piling up quickly, or so even there's also it's stories that actually in Scotland they have 400 different words for different types of snow too. So the key though is the unique definition between those types of snow. If we just want to touch on that, 53 different Inuit words for snow. So in that, snow is an important concept in their culture. They respect that culture, or the snow in their culture and that concept in their culture. So they've used many different words, different facets of, if you want to use that, the consistent metaphor, many different facets to that diamond of snow in that word. So let's now look at another culture. Sanskrit had 96 different words for different types of love. So again, we look at some people look and say, well, why all those words, and why would I want to think of all those words? Because we have to look at even that idea of the Bud Light love. I love you, man. Remember that commercial that for so many men kind of hit it home.
Yes.
So,
and Dr. E, I mean, we use the word casually sometimes, and I think that was more of a casual use of the word, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. That's how I took it. Like, I love you, love your friendship, love your camaraderie, and stuff like that. But obviously, there's different types of love, I think, is what you're getting at, right?
Well, and I think even in that concept there of saying it, realize it had to come as a source of humor. Why? Because to me, and why this discussion is so important, is to me, men often view love over time through the lens of vulnerability and weakness. I was just having a discussion with somebody the other day about how they felt so excited and giddy about meeting somebody they hadn't seen in a long time, and the feelings they had about them. And I'll ask many people, what age do you feel? Especially when they're meeting somebody who's like a love earlier in their life, and they'll say, well, I feel like that little kid again. Again, that goes back to that self-concept discussion and where we get stuck. However, they realize over time, their ability to show that love, feel that love, express that love often gets covered up by other emotions and their defenses. So in that context of that Bud Light love, it's many men think it's weird to tell another man, I love you, because it's overlapped with that idea of an intimate type of love. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But that's where, like I said, if we felt okay with those words and we had that, maybe we call that I have that Bud Light love for you, man, but if we had that, and even then I use humor here too. But humor is also a way that we can express deeper concepts of emotions with a chuckle afterwards. So again, that's another way we soften that and also protect ourselves. So again, in this way, understanding the importance of all those different concepts and the importance of the Sanskrit language. Latin still had 7 different words for love. And Greek, which we're going to talk about today, had 3, because it's a lot less to explain and a lot less for me have to remember through this discussion. Those words are agape, Eros, and Philos.
Now, I think a lot of people might recognize some of those. I certainly remember learning about those, I think, in high school, maybe even touched on it a little bit in college. So those aren't totally foreign concepts, or maybe shouldn't be totally foreign concepts, but tell us about those. I remember, I think everyone can figure out what Eros is, right? A sort of romantic love.
Right.
Tell us about the others here.
Yeah, well, so in the Bible they talk about agape, and that's that's the concept of that. That's the type of love that God has towards man. I think also that can overlap into that just love that we have, that connection we have to people, to that we feel at times, that sense of potential oneness that we feel. We then have Eros. Eros is, like we said, that romantic type of love. That type of love actually has some physiological ties to it. So what we want to look at with Eros is how it actually feels like a mind-altering experience, and that goes through some kind of periods of adaptation and growth, and it waxes and wanes over time. And I'll get to that in a second. This is a little more in depth. Philos is that brotherly type of love. It's a love that we have, again, towards our siblings, towards our friends, between our parents and kids, and so between our pets and stuff. That it's kind of that friendship and that building love we have for people in that way. So even as you can see, as I'm describing this, these 3 words don't even near capture it, let alone, if I went through the 7 words in Latin. But the idea is we really want to consider the unique facets of the ways that we love people. So that's where I think, again, it still results in a lot of confusion in the ways that we might use that word love with people.
Right. So Philos is the Bud Light commercial type of love, right?
Yeah,
right?
in that way, it is.
Yeah.
It is, and even different, because you can tell. You can. I think even how we might feel towards our parents. Like I said, it overlaps into that. And off this, I wanted to specify, years ago on Oprah, I remember they had a discussion of, they brought some moms on, and Oprah asked, or somebody asked, how those moms, the difference between the way they love their kids and the way they love their spouse. And the concept was, the discussion was that a lot of the audience became up in arms with the idea that the moms said they loved their husbands more than they loved their kids. And I think in that, the disservice that did to those relationships, because people thought, well, you should love your kids more than your spouse. And some would say, no, you should love your spouse more than your kids, depending on which side of the lens. But all they had to do was say, what are the different unique ways that you love your spouse? And what are the different unique ways that you love your kids? Because it became a hierarchical discussion: more, less, good, bad, right, wrong. And we got into that. They got wrapped up in that discussion. I thought, what an absolute disservice that discussion did, because it almost comes back to that Nike billboard, second place is first loser. No, you can love everybody in an absolutely unique way. And that's okay. Not better or worse, or righter or wronger, or, or stronger or weaker. It's just the unique nature of the way that we might love people.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like love is being used in a very blunt manner in that case, and I think what we're trying to get at here is it's a little more complex, a little more nuanced than just love, which is why I guess Sanskrit has 96 words and for it, right?
Right, and I love the word you use, blunt, because often I feel like love can be used as a blunt weapon with people. I'm going to take it, I can give it, and that's often what ends up, to me, really affecting, being our first relationships that are lost. If we look at that scarcity model, can be relationships in the family where we feel like those relationships were affected. I look at different cultures, when if kids don't behave the right way towards their parents, or aren't worshiping or acknowledging their parents or all they've done, then the parents will take their love away, or they'll excommunicate the kids from the family. We know that in Catholicism, obviously, there was excommunication, there was heresy. There were people who, that if you committed a sin towards God or towards the religion, they basically kicked you out, and there are some religions that still do that to this day. And I think that sends the wrong message about what love is. Love is not conditional at its core. Human beings have made it conditional. And that's what we want to really be able to see. So that's where it becomes dangerous in how we can use that and how it's been used more as a weapon, which is why people hide it behind fear and, and behind pain and a lot of defenses.
Yeah. Now, you said something earlier that caught my attention, Dr. E, and that was that love is associated with weakness and not strength in many cases. But when you said that, I immediately thought of, in my mind went right to a Rolling Stones song called Love is Strong. That's literally the title of the song, and the lyrics are repeated numerous times throughout that song.
Right.
So I wonder, why is it associated with weakness, and why is it not associated with strength? Clearly, some people see it as a strong emotion.
Well, I agree. Absolutely. I mean, I think what we have to look at is even look at Huey Lewis's song, from Back to the Future, The Power of Love, So we have to look at the inconsistencies in our culture between what we say and what we do and what we put into action. That to me is a lot of hypocrisy. These are the things our kids are seeing. These are the things that we've seen. These are the things that are demonstrated in our culture. Like I said, even through our religions. So if we're able to recognize what we have done to that word, and yes, we have all these idealized ways. So go back to episode 1 when we talked about hierarchical models of power. And the reason I reference these for you guys, viewers and listeners, is so that you can go back and maybe re-listen or review some of these concepts. We talked about your real, feel, and ideal selves. This is, to me, the same thing we do with this concept of love. We have our idealized view of love that says, well, it is the most powerful emotion, and it is strong, and it is powerful. Okay, that's great. Yet our real in our culture says it's something to feel afraid of. It's something to avoid. It's something to push away. So when we recognize the discrepancy and disparity between our feel and our ideal, what drives that, or our ideal and our real, what drives it is the feel. And that feel aspect of self is really that fear that we surround love with, the feelings of betrayal that get attached to it. So in that, we have love, and then we have strings: betrayal, violated, humiliated, rejected, abandoned. And all those basically they start to cover up our ability to really see love for what it is. So I say that while, yes, a lot of our work towards love, just like our work towards finding equity, that is a love-based model, is aspirational. And as we truly understand the purpose of each emotion, its purest purpose, we'll understand how each emotion helps us find our way back to all the different facets of love, all these different unique definitions of love.
Now, Dr. E, as you were explaining all of that, my mind went to another song. And I think it's a pretty famous one called Love Hurts by Nazareth. I think it was maybe in the 70s it came out.
Yep.
All the things you were describing, I mean, the lyrics of that song: love hurts, love scars, love wounds, love marks.
Stinks.
Yeah. So
you love her and she loves him.
Yes. So is this just a natural fact of love? Like, it is going to hurt it at some points, or people are going to use it as a weapon, let's say?
I think in our hierarchical model, in the world that we live in, yes, love is used as a weapon. Love is often manipulated. Love is often sorely misunderstood. And we don't have an education. To me, the most important education we can ever get is about emotion. We have no classes in nursery or preschool, in first grade, all the way through high school. We start to touch in psychology that talks about psychology, not necessarily emotion. We don't have any classes that teach about the purpose of emotion, and even the way different people understand emotion is different and unique to each. I know I've had conflicts or discussions with colleagues about how they view emotions differently, and we get in the rights and wrongs of that. Even as we explore that, if we even can differ in the way we view emotions, we can understand, like I said, the idea that emotions aren't bad, they aren't wrong, they aren't weak. Just like love is not about good or bad or right or wrong or strong or weak. It's about understanding our place in the world. So from there, then I wanted to get back to Eros, because even within Eros, that can be infatuation. It can be a feeling of really a deep sense of feeling in love. It can be something that can be very fleeting where we dive into that. The key, though, like I was talking about, is to me, Eros also has to do with the physiological process that when people fall in love, it is like pinging an area of the brain that also connects with certain drug addictions. So it is like a high. So when you look at people that first fall in love and they're in the clutches of that, remember, we have to think about Cupid, all the stories and myths that have been told. Cupid shoots that arrow in, and all of a sudden that person, those people are in love. They're seeing stars, they're seeing hearts and all that stuff.
What's on that arrow? What did he put on that arrow?
I think there was a little heart on that arrow. But
was there a drug? I mean, I'm wondering did he put some like love potion on it or something, Dr. E?
Could have been, love potion number 9, right?
Yeah.
So in that, what we have to look at is that when this area of the brain gets pinged, it affects our ability to see reality, the reality of that person, and even the reality of other people's input to us in a rational way. It affects our logic. So what we want to look at in that, and how is it affecting our sense of logic and ability to see things rationally, is that there's a couple ways to look at it. From an anthropological level, in order for us to have offspring, if we want to go back to our natural evolution or kind of natural selection process, why would this process be adaptive and feed into natural selection? Well, when that area of the brain gets pinged, it basically stays pinged for about 7 years. So we've heard that concept called the 7-year itch. There was a movie in the 60s with Marilyn Monroe in it, but that term had been used obviously before that for it to be brought into the cultural lexicon to be used for even the title of a movie. But there is validity to that the area that stays pinged for about 7 years. After 7 years, then it wanes, and then it can be renewed. So one of the things we have to look at is that it gives us the ability as human beings to fall in and out of love. Now, there's other areas beyond this to go into of what the implications of that are. But what we want to think about is, if we think about it from a survivability standpoint, how long does it take for two people in a less civilized world to have a child, to raise that child to the point that there were two people together, so one can go out and hunt and gather food, the other can care for the child or children? It's about 5 to 6 to 7 years old to where that child can then contribute to the family or to the tribe or to the pack, and is not going to be totally defenseless. So in that, the thing to realize is there might be some anthropological reasons if we want to come to it from that level. Now let's look at it from a spiritual perspective. From a spiritual perspective, let's say that this is a divine emotion that's been gifted to us. It gives us the ability for our relationship to evolve and grow. That if people are falling in and out of love, what I always say is that 7 years, it gives you the opportunity to reset that relationship. There are things that can definitely intervene in those 7 years if somebody falls in love, whether it's pattern of abuse, which, as we know, sometimes even the abuse won't curtail that person's desire to stay with that person due to codependency and other factors that brought them to that issue. But sometimes it's just that in love feeling, that drug is so powerful, they don't see the harm that either one is doing to the other, that they're both doing to each other. But at that 7-year reset, and that's when I'm working with couples, I'm often asking, how many years ago did you meet? And people would be surprised at how many times it's very close to intervals of 7 that they start to have problems in the relationship.
So this happens for people who are 14, 21, 28 years in. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And a lot of people, when they first experience this, it can feel kind of scary because they're married to this person. They're like, what's happening? I'm not feeling the same way. So often I'm helping to normalize this physiological process. That to me is where sometimes people prematurely may get divorced, may do other things that affect their relationship that have permanent implications. If we can understand the waves of Eros, that it really, to me, moves in waves, and what opportunities it opens up for people who only have Eros in their relationship, it's probably not going to survive another iteration or a revivification of Eros when that rises again. Every marriage or intimate relationship, you really want it to have agape, Eros and Philos, because when the Eros wanes, then Philos is there to carry the friendship, that deep friendship. That Eros is there where you admire that person and you have that connection to that person, that you enjoy them for who they are and the uniqueness that they bring to the relationship. So in that, all three components are critical. That's why I'm often encouraging people, especially kids, teenagers, people are often wanting to dive into intimate sexual relationships. And I'm discouraging that because oftentimes our brain isn't ready for that Eros intimacy. And then we have all these emotions that come up after that. And I often say, your body's writing checks that your brain and your developmental level can't cash. And we see that too often. And that to me is where we've made marriages, we have a disposable culture with that, because we have an incomplete understanding of the concepts of love and what love is and how to build love and what's necessary to really form a lasting love. And that's why, in the work I do with people, I really do believe that 95% of marriages, so I believe, are really workable, not just salvageable, but ones where people can find a thriving relationship, because not only does one person work on themselves, but both people have to be willing to look at themselves. Remember that last relationship model with the little circle and the two people, and in those two people, they brought all their issues to the relationship.
Yes, that was the more exchange of energy rather than just the taking of energy. Exactly. Dr. E, that is a very 95%. That's a very optimistic number on your part, I think, because what is the actual divorce rate? It's like around 50% in the United States, right?
It is.
So
it is.
I think what you're saying is that if people actually put a little bit more work in or examine things a little on a little bit of a deeper level, they might have a better outcome. Is that
absolutely? I think everybody can use premarital counseling. I think that's so critical. And even in that, taking the time to understand yourselves. Taking premarital surveys are good because it helps people understand what do they have in common and what's different. You don't want two people with the same ideas and ideals necessarily marrying each other, because that uniqueness is variety. I think one of the things that is so awesome about my marriage with my wife, we've been married, this will be 32 years this year, and she's my best friend, is the differences between us, and that we can have discussions, and there's certain things that unify us and bring us together, and there's certain things that we have different perspectives on. So you don't want to marry a clone, and you want to look at those ideals before you get married and talk through those things. And even what I've encouraged people to do, and I've encouraged my daughter to do this, is every relationship that a person's been in, write the things down about that person that you like, make a list of the things that you don't or didn't like. And then, and this is sometimes things that you can work on together. And then if relationships end, what are your deal breakers? Even when you're getting into a relationship, you might want to look and say, somebody has physical abuse towards me. That's a deal breaker. And I think too many times we forgive that, we let that go. And I think we got to look at that. If more people realize that physical actions were just, no, we've got to reset. Either you end the relationship and that person does their work, and you can work on resetting it and starting with different mores, values, tenets, then that's different than just saying, no, go away. Because like I said, sometimes an old relationship has to die for a new one to be reborn. But in my marriage, I always say, in the 7 years, we're seeing each other's growth. We're realizing the friendship that we have. We're realizing the admiration we continue to have for each other. And it just keeps getting better and better to me, is the way I see it. And that's about my choice and perception, but it's also, to me, a rational view of where we're at in our relationship, our ability to parent together, our ability to continue to have our independent careers and do what we do, our enjoyment of just spending time together. I look forward every day to coming home and hanging with my wife and my daughter, and that's the way I said that. I want that for everybody.
Yeah. And I think that you just gave some great advice there, Dr. E, and that is, take out a piece of paper, make a list, or do it on your notes on your phone, right? Like, I don't think everyone maybe has all the time in the world or the money the disposable income to be able to go to therapy or whatever. But what you're saying here, I think, is a very simple and actionable thing people can do, right? Make that list of the things that you like about your significant other or love about your significant other, and your deal breakers.
Yeah, years ago, I had somebody who made a list. It was part of their work because they were having a hard time, ever thinking they could get in a relationship. And years later, they called me up, like probably 4 years later, I think it was. They called me up and said, "You won't believe this. I found somebody with everything on my list, and they lived in my apartment building. I'd passed them, but when I really looked at it, we started talking, and then later I looked at the list. They had all the traits. And then I had somebody else did the same thing, and they said they had everything on that list, but they weren't tall. But because they had everything else on that list, I didn't care about them being tall. I realized how kind of surfacey that was, and that wasn't as important as the depth of who they were as the individual and what I really loved about them. And often those exterior characteristics, they fall away when we really find those emotional connections with people.
Okay, that's interesting. So I didn't think that you were talking about specifically just even physical characteristics. You're saying put those on the list too, huh?
Absolutely. I mean, it's aspirational, and in that, my daughter has her list, and after she had the end of a recent relationship, I said, you might want to put them on the list. She goes, "No, Dad, I already did. I have this list," and she went through it with me, and I was like, wow. And every relationship that she's had has really improved on the relationship that she had before that. And I think that really sets her up, to marry her best friend one day, because that's the goal to me, is when you marry your best friend, you can overcome anything. And like I said, when Eros waxes and wanes, which is normal, you'll still have somebody that you really enjoy spending your time with. We see more and more people divorcing when their kids leave to school, or even in their 60s or sometimes 70s, because they just don't feel happy. And I think that those things can be preventable if we're mindful of when we're going into relationships and why we're going into them, and then B, at those times of reset, we're pursuing the understanding of why we feel what we feel when the Eros wanes. Because people might be able to fall back in love and get that Eros back again just because they want to make it happen. But I just think the quality of that, it's a qualitative issue that I think we have to look at in our relationships. And I think when we do that, like I said, we can have many more marriages that can survive and thrive and continue to grow, versus ones that we just feel are disposable and we can just, walk away from.
And can that Eros type of love, can you actually control it mentally like that? Or is that just more of a chemical thing going on in the body, like you were describing?
I think it's both. I think that when we understand that there's this chemical process going on inside, that our part of our brain is resetting, and we have this opportunity to grow it again, we can keep that in mind. Because I think at those times I know from experience that when people are in those times that their brain is shifting, they can mindfully look and say, oh, this is what's happening. This is the journey. This opens up this opportunity. So my mind can start wandering to the next piece of candy, which that's what I think part of our cultural issue is that we're looking for the next piece of candy, or which chocolate am I going to try now? We have to look at that in what we're looking to fulfill an immediate need, versus seeing the long-term journey that we're on in the relationship, to say, no, this is worth this. Our relationship is worth this. Each of us are worth this, and knowing that we're going to go through this. And like I said, at those times, if you can't afford therapy, a lot of times people are doing premarital counseling with their pastors or priests or ministers. They're sometimes qualified to do this and will offer to do this. I think there are a lot of books out there. I don't have any in mind offhand, but I think even looking at some of the compatibility surveys people can find online, just to see where there are differences, whether even like a Myers-Briggs. A lot of people talk about Myers-Briggs, strength finders, things like that are looking more at just personality characteristics in the way we approach the world. We can look at that with our spouse and go, oh, you approach things this way, I approach things this way. And in that, having some of those honest discussions, and not continuing to hide behind the fear that if I share my truth, that someone's going to leave me, I believe that the truth sets us free.
Truth sets us free. That's very interesting, Dr. E. And so let's talk about, again, actionable takeaways here. I think being mindful, you said, about these types of love and being able to recognize them in your daily life, in your relationships with the people with whom you're close. And then make the list, right? Do you have a name for the list? Is there a name for a list?
I mean, it might just be, my relationship reality list. I mean, I wouldn't want to call it a wish list because often wishes don't come true, that idea.
Right.
It's a scarcity thing. But if I look at my relationship preference list, or maybe we can come up with a jazzy phrase for that between now and next episode.
Yeah.
But I think that's the idea, and just keep it. Often, I've encouraged people, just keep it on your phone, on the notes thing, so that you can quickly get to it and add another one. Or even the other thing people can do on that list is not just have the solid list, but what is the importance of that characteristics. So like I said, with that person who found out that height wasn't important, initially, they might have thought height from a 1 to 10 might have been a 5 in importance, versus what they realized in the long run, it really was like a 1 or a 2, because all these other characteristics. So we not only look at the list itself, but the importance or value or valence, it's called, of that item on that list.
Very good. And everyone can do this. There's nothing holding people back from doing it, right?
And start it young. Start it as a teenager. If you're a parent, encourage your kids to really start to do this. And it's not a shopping list for a relationship. To me, it's an awareness list. And it's a list to help you to grow from and learn from. Because I think a lot of times people look for, well, what do I want in a spouse? And I think that we have to look at that when we reduce it just to a shopping list. What's going to be the depth of that relationship, versus if I see it as something I feel that will help me connect with somebody and really be aware of myself and aware of the relationship and aware of them. What are we doing then? We're coming back to that abundance model of relationships. And we're learning from each relationship. Oh, this person taught me that this was important. And this person taught me that this was important. And those, to me, like I said, are the important pieces to look at.
I love that idea, Dr. E. I love that idea. Now, which type of love was I talking about there?
It could have been Agape, it's kind of part of that.
Could have been Agape. I think it might have been Philos. I think it was more that Bud Light commercial.
Yeah. So again, we need more words. We just don't have the words.
It's true.
So again, in that, and in that, I think we'll talk about relationship issue. We'll definitely be talking about relationships and potentially intimate relationships in future episodes. So I'll probably go back to this Eros Philos, because even in my discussion, and we're going pretty long today, there were some other facets of that anthropological versus that spiritual perspective that I really didn't get to complete, but the idea at least was introduced to see that. And I think the idea is that as human beings, we have the opportunity to reset and to really interpret our relationships as places of growth and abundance, versus seeing them just as places that we might surround with fear and pain and scarcity. So again, see that even with your kids, you can reset your relationships with your kids. It might not be in that Eros way, still Philos, when we get that feeling of, remember, hate pushes us away from things that have caused us pain, are causing us pain, or could cause us pain. We got to understand that when we start to build those barriers, it's our choice what we do with the barriers we put around those relationships, so that we can understand ourselves, understand others, and work to build more long-term, lasting, loving relationships in every aspect of our life.
Yes, Dr. E. Thank you. Enlightening ideas as always from you. Very good episode. This was really, I think we really got somewhere here, and have gotten here, as I said at the beginning, through 9 episodes now. So,
well, this is one of my favorite discussions with people. I think it's so critical, important, and it's something that, with all the work I've done in the news and the hundreds of interviews, it's not something that really has the opportunity to come up. And you can see it's not something you can talk about in a 3 or 4 minute soundbite. You can just present the idea of it, and then you got to move on. Commercials coming up. So I love these. I love these opportunities here to dive in, and I enjoy our exchanges. And You know what, Andrew? I love you, man.
Love you too, Dr. E. All right. We'll do it again. So
all right, sounds good. So until next time.